This
Okay, there we
conference
go.
will now
Perfect.
be recorded.
Great. So this session, I just want to give a quick background. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA. And over the past few months, I have received several emails from members, and we've also had several discussions as an APA Ohio board around electric vehicles and how it is beginning to impact communities, particularly in the zoning realm or just general community development. And we thought it would be a really good idea if we put together a webinar of some folks that have some experience and under this topic. And we are recording the session, and we'll have it available up on our YouTube channel as well if you would like to share this with others. So I am going to first introduce the person who really put this particular session together. And that is Sarah Conley Blue. And Sarah is the Director of Sustainable Energy Solutions at Rural Action. And Rural Action is a nonprofit working to create a more just and sustainable economy in Appalachian, Ohio. And her work specifically focuses on catalyzing clean energy development in coal country through smart policy and planning. And Sarah has an MPA from Ohio University. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to Sarah, and Sarah will introduce our other two panelists as well as we get into this. So Sarah, it's all you.
All right, thanks, Christine. Good morning. Well, no, wait, officially, good afternoon, everyone. Glad you could join us on a Thursday, and I appreciate the opportunity to sort of bring you some of the framework and thinking, I think, currently taking place across the state in preparation for electrification. We're really seeing huge trends in the auto industry, and certainly a commitment at the federal level to bring electric vehicles and the electrification infrastructure needed to deploy electric vehicles throughout the region, throughout the country. And it's definitely a great time to begin planning for this if you aren't already. So I imagine those in the audience are, kind of coming from a breadth of understanding about this. Maybe some of you are just kind of dipping your toe in. Maybe some of you have extensive knowledge on this subject. So, we're going to try to keep this somewhat high level, but because we only have an hour and there's a lot to talk about. But, please use this opportunity to get out any questions you might have for our speakers today. The best way to do this, we kind of allocated time at the end. Let me go to our sort of agenda so that you can see what we have planned today. And we'll have time at the end to answer questions with our presenters. But, in advance of that, feel free to put a question in the chat if it comes to mind while they're speaking. And I must say, we're still awaiting the arrival of Lily Ballingy, the transportation specialist from the Department of Transportation. We do hope she joins us. I sent her an email. We'll see if I can get her. And if not, then we certainly will have a little bit more time, to carry on with questions for Brandon Jones. But let me lead off by introducing Brandon. And I'm realizing my screen share here makes it impossible for me to see and read his bio. So I'm just gonna wing it here. And maybe this introduction of Brandon will be more from a personal standpoint, because Brandon's been a colleague of mine now for several years. He's been working for Clean Fuels Ohio as the fleet consultant. If you're not familiar with Clean Fuels Ohio, they are Ohio's Clean Cities Coalition chapter, and that is a national network of organizations who are working to advance clean transportation across the country. So Clean Fuels Ohio has been working here in the state on any number of alternative fuel advancement, research, outreach, and analysis. So they're an incredible resource, and Brandon has been really the cornerstone of the consulting and fleet analysis work that they've been doing for municipalities, businesses, and fleets across the state. So I'm going to turn it over to Brandon, and Christine has the magic tools to make his screen share possible. So give me just a moment here to unshare my screen. Oh, she's got it.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that introduction. That's perfect. That's better than I think I could have done. So really appreciate that introduction. Give me a second here to pull up these slides, and I'll dig into things. And thanks so much to everyone from APA Ohio for the invite today. All right. And then a second to pull up my view. All right. Second here. Sorry, okay. Does everyone see my slides okay? Sorry, still getting used to the go-to meeting here. Awesome. All right, yeah, so thanks again. As Sarah mentioned, I am the consulting services manager with Clean Fuels Ohio, and we'll be discussing electrification trends both on the EV vehicle side and on the EV charging infrastructure side in Ohio. And I'll be using the shorthand for EV charging infrastructure, electric vehicle supply equipment, or EVSE there. So I'll start with just a brief intro to who we are at Clean Fuels Ohio. Sarah covered most of it, so I'll move through that quickly. I'll go through then a brief snapshot of where the EV market is right now, both nationally and in Ohio. There's some really interesting trends that we see in Ohio that are mirroring what's happening at the national level, which is exciting to see. Then I'll give a little snapshot of kind of where EV charging infrastructure stands in Ohio right now, mostly from a mapping perspective, to see, just to get a sense of where the gaps are and where the opportunities are. And some brief notes on kind of thinking in an integrated fashion about EV charging planning from the local to regional to state level. And then I'll wrap up by discussing some opportunities in the state through Clean Fuels Ohio or otherwise for support and funding around EV charging infrastructure planning, and we'll wrap up after that point. So as Sarah mentioned, Clean Fuels Ohio is a U.S. Department of Energy Clean Cities coalition advocating for clean fuels and other clean transportation technologies and services statewide. There's about 80 to 90 or so Clean Cities coalitions in the United States. Some states have more than one. We are the only one in Ohio, and we are the largest Clean Cities coalition, while also being our own standalone 501c3 nonprofit as well. And we run a number of programs. We have a membership program for industry partners. We have a policy program advocating for clean fuels friendly policy at the state level. We have my consulting services program that conducts fleet and other site host analysis and planning projects for the adoption of alternative fuel vehicles, in addition to any fueling or charging infrastructure. And Clean Fuels Ohio, we are a fuel agnostic organization. meaning we support any alternatives to petroleum and diesel, but we of course do a lot of work in the EV space, especially our Drive Clean or Drive Electric Ohio program, which is our kind of grassroots outreach and education arm on EV adoption in the state. So I'll jump in now to a little snapshot of where the EV market is, and our timing here for the meeting today is very advantageous, as we recently had some updates from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. They released this electric vehicle outlook on an annual basis, and they just recently released the 2022 outlook, looking at trends from 2021. So we've got some new kind of snapshots and projections that we receive, and this is a report that we track and have found really helpful in getting a sense of where the market is and where it's going. And they look across these kind of four factors for the EV market, from where things are in terms of business policies in the private sector to policy around EVs, to research and development in the technology space, and other economic market factors that are driving changes for EVs. So one thing that they closely track, and that is a really important thing to track in terms of knowing, okay, when are EVs, their upfront costs, when is it going to come to a point that is closer to the sticker price that we see for standard internal combustion engine vehicles? And one of the main things we track for that is the cost per kilowatt hour for battery packs in EVs, which we've seen, as you can see from this chart, decline pretty drastically over the last 10 years or so, about an 89% drop from 2010 to 2021. And the current cost per kilowatt hours are around $130, $132 per kilowatt hour. And it's projected that once that falls to around $100 per kilowatt hour, that's really going to be the tipping point for seeing the sticker price of EVs be reaching parity with that of internal combustion engine vehicles. So also Bloomberg New Energy Finance gives a good snapshot of kind of where the different vehicle class and application market segments of EVs are. And so, we've seen for the last number of years that there's a pretty decent saturation of the 2- and 3-wheeler and bus market for EV models and options and share of sales. But it's really in the passenger cars for standard motorists, as well as in the commercial vans and trucks space, that really the opportunity for growth is in the EV market. And based on the snapshot of where those numbers are right now, and then these projections for where they're anticipated to be in 10 and 20 years, really shows you that in the passenger cars, and then the light duty commercial vehicles or LCVs, and the medium to heavy duty commercial vehicle space, that over the next 10 to 20 years, those are expected to, for the most part, start catching up with the 2- to 3-wheelers and with buses. So you can really see how that's anticipated to start to achieve parity in the market share across those different applications. So we're really anticipating those to be major growth spaces over the next 2 decades. And then kind of backing out then to what that looks like for the entire electric vehicle market over the next, by the time of mid-decade here, is that we anticipate seeing, the EV market sales going from, share of sales going from 10% last year to 20 to 25% by mid-decade, which will be a huge growth in those sales. So that's kind of both, on the macro scale, kind of where we're at and where we're going. And this Bloomberg New Energy Finance really tracks this at a global level. So getting a little bit closer to home, Atlas Public Policy, and they have an electric vehicle arm where they track these EV sales at a national level. When we look at 2021, we really saw a huge growth in EV sales in the United States, of a growth of it essentially doubled from 2019 and 2020 levels to 2021 levels. So really a huge surge of growth last year. And when we look at that at a quarterly level, we really see that it was around Q2, especially of last year, where things seem to really jump in terms of EV sales, and they've stayed consistently high through the first quarter of 2022. So that trend is continuing from 2021 into 2022, where we saw that record growth last year. And so this is what we're seeing at the national level. Now, Ohio has actually been following this same trend. And so this is from the alternative fuel vehicle dashboard that's available on ODOT's Drive Ohio program website, and this is tracking BMV registration data in Ohio. And while it's classified across alternative fuel vehicle types, for motorist registrations, it's almost entirely made up of EVs. So for all intents and purposes, this is a snapshot of EV growth in the state. And we see that from 2019 to 2020 into 2021, that approximately doubling of EV sales that we saw at the national level was reflected at the state level here in Ohio as well, and that the growth is continuing into 2022, which we can see a little bit more clearly on this map here, where you can see that they've got 2022 registration data through April of this year, and you can see that on a month-by-month basis, the EV registration numbers are higher each month so far through April in 2022 than they were for that given month in 2021, which was already a record sales pace. So we're continuing that rate of growth through this year. So the EV market really is expanding quite drastically, both nationally and in the state of Ohio, which is essentially following those national average trends. So just wanted to give that snapshot kind of where EV adoption is in the state, and the growth trajectory that it's on, and that it really established last year, and that we're seeing continue and hoping will continue throughout the rest of 2022 and into 2023. Now, one of the main reasons to highlight, and I won't get into this in too much depth, but just want to highlight that one of the main advantages of EVs, and that most of us are probably familiar with, is that the operational costs of an EV are going to be much lower than that of internal combustion engine vehicles for fuel up and maintenance. Fewer moving parts, and electricity is cheaper than gas or diesel. So those are a large part of the at least financial incentives, in addition to, of course, the clean air and environmental incentives to adopt EVs. And getting to a little bit more of what the typical figures are, that fuel costs tend to be about 50 to 60% less for EVs, and then it's usually around 40 to 50% less for maintenance and servicing of EVs. So just a sense of how much savings they can be over the lifetime of the vehicle for operational costs. And so the financial case for folks for adopting EVs really comes down to, okay, are those operational savings, are they going to make up for any higher sticker price for EVs? And as we've seen, as that cost per kilowatt hour for the battery packs continues to come down, it's really going to be a no-brainer cost-wise when those operational costs start to really outweigh any upfront costs. So I'm going to switch now to giving a little snapshot of kind of where the EV charging infrastructure map across our state looks like right now, and what some key factors to consider, and how that expansion will be going through various funding and planning mechanisms that are ongoing in different parts of the state. So what we're looking at right here in terms of the map of EV chargers in the state is the Alternative Fuels Data Center, which is a U.S. Department of Energy resource, has a mapping tool across the nation for basically locating publicly accessible EV chargers. And so here you can see I've created two maps here, one of all the level 2 charging stations in the state, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen here, and then on the right-hand side, the number of DC fast charging stations in the state. So you can see that for both major clusters in the major metro areas, with obviously a lot of opportunities for expanding into further rural areas of the state. You can see kind of where those where the density has started accumulating in the state for EV adoption. Now, one thing to consider too, and I'm sure the next presentation will go into this a little bit more in terms of the federal bipartisan infrastructure law funding, as well as the NEVI formula program that is being worked on at the state level to plan for the build out of EV charging infrastructure on especially interstate highways. But it's important to note that even though we do see, these maps look like there's a great number of EV charging stations in the state, especially in major metro hubs, and that there's opportunity to build on this network. When we consider what some of the requirements are for really being a fully built out state with a really robust EV charging network, one thing that's helpful to consider is that the highways in our state are have been nominated or being nominated as what are known as through the Federal Highway Administration alternative fuel corridors for different fuel types. And you can kind of see on the left-hand side here a snapshot of what those different alternative fuel corridor types are. And so when we're considering alternative fuel corridor designations for EVs and for EV charging, there's requirements about the location that the charging station needs to be in proximity to a highway, as well as how far apart these stations should be, and additionally in terms of what their power output in terms of kilowatt hours, in terms of kilowatts, sorry, should be at any given station. So once you factor those in, you can see we have a much narrower map here in terms of the charging stations that meet those requirements along alternative fuel corridors. So a big opportunity here through some of the federal funding to really build this network out in Ohio, and have more robust charging infrastructure of DC fast chargers that have a larger kilowatt output. So just kind of wanted to show that snapshot of there is a pretty robust network of chargers in Ohio to continue to build on, especially outside of the major metro areas. But that in terms of having a larger kilowatt output and building out our state's alternative fuel corridors along our major highways, great opportunity to kind of build on these few existing ones that we currently have that are meeting those requirements. Now, really the last thing I want to touch on here before getting into some particular areas of both funding and other support is just what the value is of considering an integrated approach to EV charging planning, namely considering how planning at the local level can be matched up with regional planning, whether through metropolitan planning organizations or others in region of the state, and then in coordination with statewide planning efforts too. So that there's alignment there in terms of meeting the demands and needs and gaps in our charging infrastructure at all levels. So just kind of wanted to mention that as a kind of methodology or framework for planning, is this integration across different scales of planning for EV charging, so that gaps don't arise between, say, state planning and local civic planning. So lastly, I'm going to wrap up here with just a quick overview of some opportunities for both support and funding around EV charging planning at the state level. So one kind of consistent source of funding, both for vehicles and infrastructure of alternative fuels, has been the Ohio EPA's Volkswagen settlement grants. And the grant funds are at the point in that trust fund that they are getting close to being fully spent down, likely over the next year or two. And so the Ohio EPA will be releasing at some point this year, public comment request for how to spend down the remainder of those funds, which have previously been used for both level 2 and DC fast chargers. So there is a potential that there could be further opportunities there for EV charging. We just don't know quite yet, but should get further clarity later this year. And then some other funding sources to highlight specifically for state programs and projects is metropolitan planning organizations, especially their federal pass-through of CMAQ funds for air quality improvements that can be awarded to EV charging. There's often, it goes through different cycles, and it depends on, what conversations they're having with the PUCO, but there are utility EV charging rebate programs that have come and gone and are currently active for customers of the major investor-owned utilities in the state. Currently, AES Ohio, I believe, is the only one with an open EV charging rebate program currently. And then we work closely with the U.S. Department of Energy's Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office, and then the sub-office within that is the Vehicle Technologies Office that annually releases opportunities for funding of program dollars for grants that can be either statewide or can be kind of multi-state for various transportation projects that can include EV charging planning and deployment projects. So wanted to just mention those additional kind of sources of funding to keep an eye on. And then just lastly conclude with just kind of the work that we're doing at Clean Fuels Ohio. The program that I manage has a number of different areas that we focus on for services, but in terms of infrastructure analysis and planning for alternative fuel infrastructure, we do kind of have work that we do on helping municipalities on the planning and analysis for the expansion of EV charging infrastructure. And just real quick, I won't go into this in too much detail, but just to note that our process for conducting that work is really looking at various criteria for both DC fast chargers and level 2 chargers around, on the one hand, kind of what the immediate demand is for chargers. Essentially, where are the most drivers, where are the most EVs, where is the demand right now for EV charging in a given region. And then on the other hand, but where's the greatest need for charging stations in terms of future proofing, in terms of making sure that charging stations and EVs are accessible to low-income communities, rural communities, disadvantaged communities, communities that have been overburdened by air pollution and other forms of energy extraction that otherwise might be left out from an analysis that is just looking at, okay, where are the most EV drivers right now, and making sure that even if there's certain areas where there aren't large numbers of EV adoption right now, making sure that if they do catch up with EV adoption, that they have the resources of charging that they won't need. So that's just a quick snapshot of our services, and we do a lot of this work with municipalities in coordination with Power Clean Future Ohio, which is an organization bringing communities throughout the state together on climate and clean energy goals. And we're grant funded to do both EV fleet analysis and EV charging planning and analysis for municipalities that have joined Power Clean Future Ohio. So with that, I will end there and turn things back over, and happy to address questions at the end.
Brandon, thanks so much. And yeah, I want to underline just how useful Clean Fuels Ohio's fleet analysis tools are, and really all of the work that they do to give you a comprehensive set of resources that are really helpful as the city plans ahead. So I'd like to turn the screen now over to Lily Ballingy. Lily is the transportation specialist in the Office of the Undersecretary of Transportation Policy at the U.S. Department of Transportation. And she's a member of the Rural Opportunities to Use Transportation for Economic Success, or ROUTS, initiative. Lily, I think I'll pass it to you to take it away here. Looks like your screen is up.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we can see it.
Just want to make sure everyone can hear me. I'm in that fun universe of being in the room, in the office. I'm trying not to ruin my coworkers' days. So just want to make sure everyone can hear me and can see my screen and can see the actual presentation itself and not all my notes. Hold on.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. And yeah, once you're in slideshow mode, you're good.
Well,
that bottom left.
You might, if you have more than one monitor, you might have to flip it over.
Sorry,
that's probably what's happening.
Yeah, I was slightly late for this, so it's
I can see you looking all around, so I know you have more than one monitor.
I do indeed. 1 second. My apologies, everyone. This is very professional.
And folks, if you have questions, you can type them in this chat box function that we have here. Feel free to use that. Everyone can see it, so you can chat back and forth, and we can kind of see questions as they come in, and that'll give Sarah some time to kind of organize the questions as they come in.
I'm so sorry. 1 second.
I'll keep talking. I'll remind everyone again that this session is being recorded and it's available for 1 CM credit, and it is up and available. And I will type this CM number, the link, in the chat box, because I know sometimes it's really hard to search for sessions on the planning.org site. So I will also do that, and it's also available on demand, this session. So you can tell your friends, and when I send the link via email to view the recording, you can send it off to other colleagues. And CM credits, like I said, are good. You're able to record them through the end of this year. It's an on-demand session. So I'm gonna close my trap and turn it over to Lil.
With that, I assume everyone is seeing the right slide this time. So thank you so much. So my name is Lily Ballingy. I'm from the U.S. Department of Transportation's Office of the Undersecretary for Transportation Policy. More specifically, I'm representing the ROUTS office, which I will introduce momentarily. So I'm here to present Charging Forward, a toolkit for planning and funding rural electric mobility infrastructure. This is a free comprehensive resource to help rural stakeholders scope, plan, and fund EV charging infrastructure. Just as a general note, you may also hear this called the Rural EV Infrastructure Toolkit as well. So first of all, the toolkit was developed as part of the department's Rural Opportunities to Use Transportation for Economic Success initiative, which seeks to address disparities in rural transportation infrastructure and to improve safety and economic competitiveness nationwide. So the Routes Initiative coordinates DOT's ongoing efforts to support rural communities while also ensuring that these communities benefit from the new funding opportunities that are included in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And basically our portfolio is all things rural, with the overarching goal to just ensure that everyone in the department is being mindful of the needs and priorities of rural communities. So with that, we work to engage rural communities, harmonize DOT programs, and really to utilize a whole of government approach in order to kind of address these challenges holistically and find ways to better connect rural project sponsors with funding, financing, outreach, any resources that are offered by the DOT. So with that being said, why rural and why now? I assume because you're all here, you already know the answers to these questions. So I will just highlight a couple key statistics. Transportation makes up 20% of household expenses for rural communities compared to 16% in urban areas. Rural residents drive more than their urban counterparts. They spend more on vehicle fuel and maintenance, and they often have fewer alternatives to driving in order to meet their transportation needs. I grew up in rural West Virginia, where there is definitely not a transit or bus line, nor was it particularly bike or pedestrian friendly. So, understands, and then over the long run, EVs are expected to help residents in rural areas, help to reduce those costs and minimize environmental impact of transportation. And of course, now is a great time to promote the electrification of rural America due to the federal strategy to build 500,000 electric vehicle chargers, the recent funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as executive orders from President Biden. So US DOT's Rural EV Infrastructure Toolkit was created under the Routes Initiative to really help rural entities plan and fund these transportation opportunities. So the toolkit is structured to include basics of deploying EV infrastructure, tips on planning and partnerships, and funding and financing resources. So it walks through a project planning checklist. It provides technical advice on project scope and utility, installation, operational planning. It compiles helpful tools and resources for cost analysis, charging needs assessment, equitable planning, etc. And it also lists federal funding and financing programs. Just a quick outline of the main toolkit sections. Really provides a full gamut of information, everything from EV basics for those who are very new to the topic of electric vehicles themselves, all the way to success stories. You can see what other communities have done and some examples. So the toolkit was released in its beta form in February 2022. We've been holding a series of stakeholder workshops to test it, test drive it, if you will, over the spring and summer 2022, with the goal of having a revised toolkit in fall of 2022. So the goal for these workshops is really to get outreach and to figure out direct feedback from people who are actually affected in rural communities and who are looking to engage with electric vehicle technology, so that we make sure it's actually doing what it needs to do for you. So the revised toolkit, like I said, later this year, and it will incorporate a lot of that feedback, or all of that feedback, as well as some expanded information on areas that we've seen interest, such as electric transit vehicles, school buses, and micromobility. Additionally, so I will note that the current toolkit does not include as much information on the bipartisan infrastructure law as we would like, just given the timeline of how it was published. So the revised version will include all the information on NEVI form, as well as discretionary grants. In terms of audience, this toolkit is intended for a variety of rural stakeholders, including states, DOTs and DOEs specifically, local communities, tribes, transportation providers, nonprofits, businesses, and individuals. The toolkit, it covers level 1, 2, and DCFC chargers. So it does allow you to sort of choose your own adventure, if you will, and to determine what type of infrastructure works best for you and your project. And when it comes down to it, really any rural entity, though, can use this toolkit to identify the key partners to engage with, take advantage of the planning tools, and hopefully identify, funding and financing that can help make their unique project a reality. So the important stuff. So the toolkit provides information on potential benefits that EVs offer to individual vehicle owners and rural communities. So for individuals, the benefits really include lower ownership costs, since EVs do have a higher energy efficiency, lower fuel costs, and lower maintenance costs than similar conventional vehicles. Accessible fueling infrastructure, since they can be charged at home, work, community sites, grocery stores, etc. Anywhere with EV chargers, you're not beholden to a gas pump. Expanding vehicle options. Now there is a wider range of EVs available than ever before, which we're thrilled about, and increased resilience. So there are EVs with bi-directional chargers that can even serve as a backup power source in place of diesel generators during extreme weather events or emergencies. And then for rural communities and small business owners specifically, there are definitely economic benefits, since the residents and travelers alike can visit local stores, restaurants, other attractions while charging their EVs. And there are also definitely public health and climate benefits, since battery electric vehicles specifically produce no tailpipe emissions and less brake dust pollution compared to conventional vehicles, and EVs in general just produce lower greenhouse gas emissions, especially when electricity is generated with renewable sources on the back end. Still, we realize that rural areas face certain challenges that when it comes to deploying EVs and EV infrastructure, it's just a lot harder. So, high upfront costs, longer distance between sites, potential need for grid updates are more likely, and then also just a general less exposure to EVs throughout history. So we're working together with stakeholders, especially through these workshops and presentations like this, to try to find solutions to these challenges. Diverse partnerships can be really helpful to support rural entities in planning, funding, and implementing EV infrastructure. For example, state, multi-state, and tribal partners include groups planning for EV corridors, state DOTs, energy and environmental agencies, multi-state initiatives, people working on climate and electric vehicles. Similarly, next we have local and regional planning partners, such as transportation planning agencies and clean cities coalitions that can help, align EV infrastructure projects with existing transportation planning efforts and funding through the Department of Energy's National Coalition of Clean Cities, which is shown here on the map to the right. It helps create networks of local stakeholders that advance alternative fuels through public-private partnerships. These local clean cities coalitions may be able to provide rural stakeholders with access to technical assistance for EV infrastructure and grant funding opportunities. We always recommend contacting them first. They have so much knowledge, and it's just a great opportunity. Next, we have electric utilities, which provide the technical advice on connecting to the electric grid, and then can also take ownership in some cases as it pertains to aspects of EV infrastructure installations. Charging networks next can own, operate, and maintain charging stations, provide technical expertise on charger technologies. And then lastly, but of course never least, site hosts provide dedicated space for charging installations and can include tourism destinations, local businesses, transportation facilities, municipal and community sites, really anything. So it's a great opportunity to get involved and to help bolster your community. And then I just also want to highlight, I know it was mentioned in the previous presentation, but the Federal Highways Administration does work with other federal, state, and local officials with private, as well as private industry folks to facilitate the interstate network of electric and alternative fuel corridors. So they were touched on briefly, but just there's this map again here. So in terms of planning for EV infrastructure, it's really important to consider local context, future needs, and how stakeholders will be engaging with EVs and the infrastructure itself. The toolkit offers some guidance to that matter on planning processes that can help streamline planning, ensure that key topics are considered, and assist with engaging partners. So just a few best practices I do want to highlight include the realization that there really just no one-size-fits-all approach. Each project will be different. Each case study will be different. So something to keep in mind as you're experiencing this with other people, reading case studies. Also, it's incredibly important to coordinate early and often with partners. and stakeholders, especially to ensure that all needs and perspectives are accounted for, and that if something changes, you can hit on it immediately, which also leads to the next one, that need to kind of build for flexibility. Projects may change, permitting process, there's things like that to be in mind for. So the toolkit does provide a lot of tools, hence toolkit. So this provides helpful items such as a project planning checklist seen here, which helps to take the guesswork out of planning and ensuring that planners know what to consider in the process of implementing infrastructure itself. So I do want to point out, though, that this is an iterative process. So you can revisit, you can refine and change things as necessary, and not all checklist items are going to be necessarily relevant to all projects. So certain things will apply more to community corridor or corridor level planning versus site specific. Just a little bit deeper of a dive into some of the tools that are included as part of the project planning checklist. On the left is under the project scoping and development section of the checklist. So this provides information on common configurations of ownership for charges, which can help rural stakeholders understand the options that are available to them specifically. And then on the right is under the installation planning section, which is a comprehensive flowchart that provides decision-making support and helps show kind of each of the key decisions that must be made in the process in order to choose between charger types, between level 1, 2, or DCFC. On top of all that, there are also a variety of other factors to consider, as well, obviously, including the equitable considerations when it comes to planning. So it's important to leverage community engagement and public involvement to address diverse needs and concerns. And obviously, a data-informed planning tool can really help inform a more equitable project. So, as I mentioned, this toolkit includes plenty of planning tools. I've mentioned a few. Here's some more. Here's listed some equity resources, calculators, interactive maps, and other reference documents. So just a handful of these tools are illustrated here. There's so many things that can be useful throughout the toolkit. Specifically, one of the favorites is the toolkit includes a table of funding opportunities that's organized by agency with information on eligibility of applicants, funding amounts, and types of project eligible that are eligible for funding. So this table, this matrix, spans 11 pages in the toolkit and is also available as a filterable list online. And so just in general, the toolkit includes a comprehensive list of relevant federal programs, along with application tips, resources, and initial points of contact. And it covers federal assistance that can include grants, loans, and tax incentives. So just a little deeper dive into some of these key federal programs here. USDOT funding programs are listed by mode, and details and eligibility are given for each funding program. The toolkit also, though, lists resources outside of USDOT, including programs from the Department of Agriculture, Department of Energy, Environmental Protection Agency, and the Internal Revenue Service. So the funding section of the toolkit has a lot more information on the typical grant award, size for each program. But as I mentioned, the toolkit in its current version does not incorporate any of the recent bipartisan infrastructure law funding. So we're already working on a revised version that will include those programs. As I mentioned, expected in fall 2022, and that'll be useful, here on out. And then just kind of want to leave you with some key links here. So the toolkit is available in browsable form online, as well as in a PDF. And I also here, there's the routes website, transportation.gov/rural, as well as our email at rural@dot.gov. We encourage you to subscribe to the email list, and we have a newsletter, so it's very useful information, not necessarily always specific to rural EV, but it's specific to rural throughout the department. We try to promote other modal programs, NOFOs, webinars, opportunities, things like that. So additionally, if you have any direct feedback to the toolkit itself or its presentation, you do have a feedback link here, as well as send an email. So I'm going to leave you with that, but thank you so much. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. And then,
That was great, Lily. Thank you so much. And we'll make sure following this presentation that PowerPoints with links and all that good stuff get sent out to everyone. And you can always, I'm sure both Brandon and Lily would be willing to, answer any direct questions. And really, we've got about 7 minutes till the top of the hour, and I'd like to give folks a chance to chime in and ask a question. You're welcome to come off camera, come off mic if you'd like to bring a question up. And I guess while folks are considering that, I'm going to bring a question from Mary here that she dropped into the chat. And it's an interesting, query around whether it might be easier in general to build electric vehicle infrastructure in a rural place, perhaps because there might be less of that built infrastructure that we see in urban areas. And I don't know, Brandon, Lily, anyone want to take this one as a response to that question?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to jump in real quick. It's a great point because it's definitely much more cost effective for EV charger installations at, say, a new build site rather than having to retrofit. That's certainly, in our planning and analysis that we do, we always recommend and say, if all things being equal, if you can time an EV charging installation alongside any newer construction or already planned construction upgrades, that's going to help you consolidate and save costs. So it's definitely a great point that if there's an opportunity to do that more often in rural areas, as you're saying, that's certainly an advantage for lowering costs rather than having to do retrofit after retrofit to upgrade and get new accessibility at a site that didn't have that planned out initially. So it's also a point about future proofing and planning that, if you are putting charging stations in at a given site, trying to build in at the initial planning stage, well, we want to make sure we have enough opportunities, enough panel space at the electrical panel, enough capacity at the transformer, opportunities to add in new conduit if we need it at a lower price. So having that built in to the planning stage, even if you're only looking at a couple of chargers to begin with, but want to have the possibility to expand should the need be there, then considering that too. So it's really great point.
Any other questions coming up as folks have been listening today? I will mention, Mary, you had asked also about an app for finding charging stations. Indeed, there are several. I think the most sort of up-to-date one that people use throughout the country with charging stations everywhere, it's called PlugShare. I'm sure I can drop a link in the chat, or if someone else has their fingers on keys. PlugShare is a really good source of information. Each charging station has a different network provider, and there are several kind of national network providers you'll find everywhere. But depending on the type of station that you're going to, whether it's level 2 or DC fast charge, they may be one of several types of stations, and each network provider has a different way of charging at their station. So you do have to have access to, like ChargePoint is one of them. You have to have a ChargePoint app in order to charge at a ChargePoint station. So when you are an electric vehicle driver, you sort of want to look into that in advance. Where will you charge if you're going to town or going, out of your region and you need to charge on the way? So that is part of the planning. And for a lot of folks, making this transition to electric, they're thinking about those things, and there are lots of tools out there to charge wherever you go. So yeah, trying to make that possible for folks. Kristen's dropped a question in. So information on the Youngstown area smart logistics hub along I-80. I'm not familiar with that myself, though. Brandon, has anyone at Clean Fuels been keeping a watch on the smart logistics hub in Youngstown?
That's a great question, because we are engaged with the Turnpike on alternative fuel infrastructure planning along I-80, specifically for EVs and CNG. I am not terribly familiar with the details on that project or that specific hub, but I'd be happy to follow up. We have other members of our team who are working closely on that work with the Turnpike that might know some more details about that specific location. So would be happy to kind of connect you through follow up with a member of our team who's working closely on that and might have information for you.
And I'll add to, with this National Electric Vehicle Initiative that, NEVI planning, it is expected that in the first year of this 5-year funding opportunity and initiative, that all states are deploying charging every 50 miles along their interstates. So that's kind of step one, making sure that there's interstate charging at very consistent intervals. And so here in Ohio, there's an effort to make sure that we're planning for that. And then, as year 2, 3, 4, and 5 come along, we're really going to be looking at where charging can go in, state highways, state routes, and byways. So if that's something that your office or, in your position want to engage with, I think Brandon would be a good point of contact at Clean Fuels. Certainly, I'm happy to help connect folks as well, but it's a really important opportunity for Ohio and other states as well to really design for this charging infrastructure build out using this funding and really thinking strategically about where charging can go throughout our state. And we've made it to the top of the hour. Thank you again, Brandon and Lily, for your time today. It's been great, and thanks everyone for joining. Christine, do you have any parting words before we wrap up?
This was great. I'm going to send a follow-up email shortly to everyone with a link to the recording and also a link to log those CM credits. And also I'm going to put a blurb in there. If you want to hear more about this topic or anything specifically more about this topic, email me, let me know. And that also goes really for any other topic. This session was put together because members reached out and said, I want to learn more about this, and I'm not really finding a whole lot of info. So, we all then put our heads together and came up with this session. So please be sure to email us and let us know if you want to hear more. And I think that's it. Everyone, thanks to to our panelists, and thanks to everyone who was able to attend today. And we'll talk soon.
So,
thanks,
bye.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.